And welcome and good evening. It's This Is Going Well, I Think, with David Cooper. I am David Cooper. It's This Is Going Well, I Think, the show where no one's listening, no one cares, that show where every episode's the last episode. Starting tomorrow, I'm out for a week. I will be back next Wednesday, July the 10th. It's my parents' first, second, third, 50th wedding anniversary. They're going to be in the woods somewhere. I'm invited. I'll go. And that's that. So I'll be out a week. Don't miss me too much. And in case you missed me already, I've got a great show for you tonight. Fantastic lineup. In about 10 minutes' time, we will talk to Carmi Levy, technology expert, for a little segment we call It's Time for Technology Time. We'll talk the wild, the outrageous stories of not one, but two men in two separate states arrested for shooting down drones in their backyard. A coincidence? Maybe. Americans can be kind of crazy. Also with Carmi, blowing up the International Space Station. You're going to want to hear the details about this, cause kaboom! Then it's foreign correspondent Tony 5, and we're going to talk a heavy topic. Doing your taxes, paying your mortgage, balancing a checkbook, signing up for things, government documents. When does it end? It's all so difficult, and it's all part about being an adult. Adulting, it's called. Tony and I will talk about how difficult that is, which is really to say, we're both not very well-adjusted individuals. Tips for adulting from Tony 5, someone who's actually privately not a terrible adult. Then, interesting research from the corporate world. Most surveyed workers think that their coworkers are less happy than they are. A disconnect, a glitch, if you will, in perception. We're going to pick this apart by the person who's done the research to prove this and what it really says about the workforce and how people are feeling out there. And finally, also a study, this one kind of alarming. And while it's a salacious headline and there's no reason to panic, it has been found that teens who use cannabis, that is younger than 20 years old, are 11 times more likely to develop a psychotic disorder. Now, the odds of a teen developing a psychotic disorder are very low. So just because your kid smokes weed doesn't mean they're going to go into psychosis. But still, marijuana, 11 times more likely, kind of alarming. And we will talk to the lead author on that study later in the show. That is the show. That is the lineup. I'm looking forward to getting to it. But first, this. I've described news stories for you as wild before, but this one's particularly wild because there's wild animals in it. But also it's wild because I'm going to tell you about a place that's not only in Florida, but under a jail. Yes, under a jail. It's an animal farm run by the Monroe County Sheriff's Office, right there in the Florida Keys. Now, before you get any weird ideas, the animals here are not doing any hard time. They are living the good life, and that is due to some very creative law enforcement. It all started back in '94 when ducks kept getting hit by cars near a jail. So one smart deputy sheriff suggested moving the ducks to this unused space right below the jail. The jail itself has stilts because, Florida, hurricanes. It's a state where even the jails are prepared for a swim. Now, the ducks, they settled in nicely, and pretty soon people started dropping off all kinds of other animals. I guess word got out that this area under the jail was a place to be if you were a pig, goat, or even a blind horse. Seriously, there's a blind horse there. It's named Sam. Now the below jail farm is home to everything from peacocks to exotic snakes. And the most exotic creature that they've got? A binturong. Yeah, I had to Google that one too. Binturong. It's basically a big fluffy mammal that looks like a bear-cat hybrid. When I see it, I picture a raccoon that got into a sexy long-term relationship with a bear and then had a kid. And what's crazier, and maybe a little uplifting, is the inmates at the jail are the ones taking care of the animals. They get so into it. Some of them even skip their rest days to hang out with the animals. It's a bit like a twisted version of summer camp. You go in for some light incarceration, you come out a zookeeper. And what's more, when these inmates get out, they often come back with their families to visit the farm. Look, kids, here's where Daddy fed the chickens right after he robbed the bank. It is kind of heartwarming when you think about it. The farm supervisor has but one rule. Once an animal is in, it's in for life. No animal left behind, no kill, no abandoning, and this place is so popular that tourists from cruise ships even come over just to see it. Who needs Disney World when you can see a jailbird taking care of a real bird? The farm funds itself through donations and events like Easter egg hunts and Christmas celebrations. So if you want to help, you can even buy stuff on their Amazon wish list, because nothing says holiday spirit like sending a case of dog food to a jail. So the next time you're in the Keys, skip the beach and head over to the Monroe County Jail for a tour. Just do me a favor, don't do anything stupid. That way you won't end up there longer than you planned. Aight? This next one, educational, and satisfies one of my major requirements for this show, mentioning poop. This gem comes straight out of Arizona, home of Wild West shows, Route 66, and now the Poo-zeum. Yes, the Poo-zeum, where ancient tales are told through fossilized dinosaur poop. Imagine the thrill of discovering that T-Rex, the fierce predator, was not much of a chewer. Turns out, it swallowed its prey whole, like someone with bad boundaries at an all-you-can-eat buffet. And how do we know this? Bone fragments in a piece of fossilized excrement. A coprolite. That's the word if you want to impress your friends. Or just call it fossilized poop. But anyway, that's the evidence. The Poo-zeum flaunts over 7,000 specimen of prehistoric poop. They've got everything from termite droppings to a 20-pound monster turd. And the piece de résistance? A coprolite so massive, it holds the Guinness World Record for poop. It's over 2 feet long, 6 inches wide, and was likely left by a T-Rex. So when nature called, you can know the king of dinosaurs was not modest. The museum's curator started this journey at just 18 years old with his first purchase of fossilized poop. Now his collection is among thousands strong. This, my friends, a man dedicated to his craft. His fascination, though, is quite understandable. After all, these hard rock relics have no smell. The stank evaporated millions of years ago, which may not actually happen to my cheesy jokes in a million years, so it's kind of impressive. Now, identifying fossilized poop, coprolites, isn't always straightforward. Sometimes what looks like an ancient turd might just be a rock having a terrible day. But, as the experts at the museum remind, the best we can often do is figure out if it came from a carnivore or herbivore. So, identifying more specific things about them is a bit like asking which one of your cats puked on your carpet. You may never know. Unless you have one cat, in which case, you can be pretty sure. Now, even if you don't find fossilized poop fascinating, you have to admit, this, a conversation starter. It gives us a window into the past, showing us diets and habits of creatures who are long gone. And if you're lucky enough to visit, maybe you'll be inspired to dig up ancient treasures on your own. Or at least think twice before throwing away your pet droppings. Hey, in 10 million years, they could be worth something. So I'll say this, the Poo-zeum is a testament to human curiosity and has the power of poop to tell its stories. So next time you are in Arizona, taking a scenic drive down Route 66, maybe take the time for a pit stop there. Who knows? You may find that prehistoric poo is just what you've been missing all your life. It's all that it's crapped up to be. You see, like that joke? That joke's going to smell for a long time. In just a few moments, it'll be time for technology time. Expert Carmi Levy is going to join us to go over some stories about 2 separate men in 2 separate states shooting down drones and blowing up the International Space Station. That's what you got to look forward to. So, I don't know how this sentence was supposed to end. Carmi Levy's up next. It's time for technology time with expert Carmi Levy. That's right, this segment has a name. Carmi, how are you? How was your Canada Day July 1 situation?
It was lovely. Fireworks were had. The dog was not happy, but she'll get over it. And it was lovely. We celebrated all that is Canada, all that is, I don't know what Canada stands for, but it's a pretty cool place. And it was a really great weekend.
Snow, hockey.
Yeah, exactly. No snow this time, except in my freezer. I did scrape some off the back when I was looking for ice cream, but and maple syrup. We did have maple syrup, and none of the sugary, lousy stuff you get at the supermarket. My wife insisted on real maple syrup.
Oh, I like Jemima's? I like that stuff. I know it's just like corn syrup. It's not real maple syrup, but they add the flavor chemicals to it. It's almost as good. Everyone's always insisting on the real stuff, and I'm happy with the fake. And it's like, what, a fifth of the cost, a tenth of the cost?
Oh yeah, real maple syrup is rather dear because the process of making it is very, very labor intensive, and you can't really automate it all that much. And if you do, the equipment is really expensive. There are a lot of sugar bushes in Quebec and Ontario where I kind of spend most of my time, and it's if you want it, it's going to cost you.
And there's like the cartel. I forget what they're called, but they have the Strategic Maple Syrup Reserve, which the reason I remember the name of is because 10 years ago, 12 years ago, there was a heist. There was a maple syrup robbery, and it made headlines all over the U.S., I think, in an attempt to laugh at Canada. But it was a big deal. It was like millions and millions of dollars of maple syrup went missing.
Everybody thinks Canada is populated by these just incredibly nice people who just say sorry all the time, but no, they're very serious about their maple syrup, and I'm guessing the criminal element has gotten wind of it. And yeah, they'll do all sorts of nasty things for this very, very sweet treat, including forcing us to dip into our national maple syrup reserves. Who knew?
Who knew? They did leave a very polite note saying thank you and please and sorry when they stole the stuff. So, they still were Canadian. Yeah.
They did. And apparently, I think in the place of the maple syrup, the police did find a couple of boxes of pancake mix. Not the really good stuff, but, it was a notice of consolation. So I'll give them that much.
I appreciate the yes and, Carmi, but I'll make the jokes around here.
Fair enough.
That seemed more aggressive than I meant it to be. Okay. I love a misunderstanding you and I had just before we started rolling here. I was like, well, I covered this story yesterday, but it's so good I want to cover it today. Yesterday, I talked about on this show a Florida man shooting down a drone that he thought was spying on him. Okay? And you're like, what are you talking about? The story that I said we could cover is a New York man. I'm like, did I misread it? So we both checked the date. It's the same date. We both checked the basic facts. It's more or less the basic facts, except it was two different dudes in two different states shooting down two different sets of drones over weird conspiracy theory level kind of stuff. What a glitch in the universe has happened. My guy was Florida man, which I got to admit is the more predictable of the states if someone's going to sit in their backyard with a gun shooting down delivery drones. Where did yours take place?
Upstate New York. So the New York State Police, they arrested a gentleman his name is Joseph H. Deshaw. He's 60 years old, and apparently he was sitting around his house, and a drone flown by his neighbor, and he didn't confront the neighbor. He didn't complain. He didn't say anything. He just went inside, grabbed his shotgun, came out, and shot it out of the sky. And I'll admit, when I originally saw that story, I thought, oh, it's got to be a Florida story, but no, it turned out it was New York. And so odd that they would happen on the same day, but I think it illustrates that we're starting to see more drones fly in the sky. And I think it's inevitable that every once in a while you're going to run into some, let's call him what he is. He's a conspiracy theorist, both of them. And they will take exception to that. Both gentlemen, and I use the term gentleman very loosely, but said that they feared that they were being watched. By whom, I don't know, maybe the government, but
government. It's G apostrophe V apostrophe MENT. Government.
There got to be a couple of apostrophes in there to really make the statement. But they felt that they were being spied on, so they took matters into their own hands. And apparently, in the U.S., it's the Federal Aviation Administration that has jurisdiction, and they will take your complaint if a drone is flying in a way that you think violates your privacy. They do not recommend that you pull out a shotgun or any other kind of firearm to take matters into your own hands. They say that apparently is a no-no and will lead to criminal charges, which in both of these cases, that is exactly what happened.
And the guy in Florida was charged with shooting or throwing a deadly missile, which until now I did not know was a crime. I just love the time. Oh, what did you get busted for? Well, I got theft. I got assault. No, I got shooting or throwing a deadly missile. It's a wild charge. It's just hilarious.
If you're going to get arrested for anything, it should be for something cool. And I think anything with deadly missile in it, that's pretty rocking. Don't get me wrong. I'm not thinking of trying it myself. I don't need that kind of notoriety, and I don't think any of our listeners do either.
Well, there you have it. Anyway, drones. There's something about Americans, this whole idea of Like you can defend your property with firearms, you know,
How many states have stand your ground rules, right? Where like basically it's I can do whatever I want if I'm on my property and I have a gun. And it's that mentality. I'm not going to get into the gun debate at this point. I'm just a Canadian. Nobody wants to hear what I have to say about it. But I also went to two schools that had school shootings where people died. So, I know what it feels like when, the office next to yours has bullet holes in it. And so unfortunately with drones, it's giving people yet another reason to have an argument that could potentially lead to this kind of thing happening. So now we're laughing because a couple of drones took the hit and fell out of the sky. At some point, there's going to be actual damage.
And what about when we have flying cars,
Oh, I don't even want to think about that. They didn't have that. Violence wasn't part of the Jetsons universe when we were first introduced to actual flying cars in the cartoon space. But I don't even want to think about that. Think of the road rage incidents with regular cars and now play that out in the three-dimensional space in the sky above us. I don't even want to think about it. I think I might just go live in a cave.
All right. We'll get Carmi live from the cave next week. Let's talk OpenAI's new product, feature. Hard to say what it is. They've aptly named it Critic GPT instead of Chat GPT. I guess everyone's a critic these days. And they're using a bot to verify a bot. What could go wrong? It's like when police investigate themselves.
That's right.
A corporation is investigating its own problems it's having with consumers. Like, what could possibly go wrong?
How much time you got? No, so they call it Critic GPT, and basically what it is we know that OpenAI, one of the things that it can do is it can create code. And I know that you and I have talked about this. You being a software developer, this obviously is near and dear to your heart. I've worked in IT. I've led teams of software developers, so it's near and dear to my heart as well. And apparently what Critic GPT does is it will look at output. It'll look at code that was created by ChatGPT, and it'll look for mistakes in that code. Which normally, if you use ChatGPT to code something, you would then have a human review it, look for the mistakes. They're not talking about replacing humans to verify output. They're going to use human trainers, human verifiers in concert with Critic GPT, and they're saying that they prefer this combination over human-only verification 60% of the time. So it's better than manual verification. It's not perfect. It's not 100% of the time. There's still instances where it just doesn't get the code. It doesn't find the error. It only focuses on short answers, but longer outputs, big complex stretches of code, it tends to stumble on. So it isn't ideal, this Critic GPT tool, but it's an interesting sort of next step in the evolution of AI as a tool for software developers. And for those who are worried about it replacing their job, it's another step toward that kind of dark horizon.
Well, here's what I think about that. I know we're talking about using AI to verify code. It's not going to be 100%. It's only 60 right now. It'll get higher, but will it ever approach 100? Then I don't know. I don't worry about this when Aunt Millie is building her first e-commerce website for selling her bead necklaces. But when Edna Engineer is writing the code, the firmware on my pacemaker, and is using a tool like this, and then in Critic GPT to verify that the code for my pacemaker is right. Like, at a certain point, these tools scare me because they could be used for computer systems that lives depend on.
Exactly.
Aircraft navigation, it could be weapon systems, awful as it sounds. You don't want a missile during a test fire, misfiring and hitting a nearby town to the test field. You don't want your pacemaker crashing, That's just my worry with automated code writing software.
It absolutely is. You can't afford an error there at all. And the automation, of course, increases the potential for errors to be introduced into the process because we know full well that all AI in its current state is subject to going rogue, is subject to these kinds of errors based on its architecture. What also worries me is it's almost like it's a case of the fox guarding the henhouse, because this is OpenAI creating a tool to ensure that OpenAI's other tool is being correct. And so OpenAI is looking over its own shoulder going, don't worry, we got it. We're observing the performance of our own tools, and trust us. And truth of the matter is this is not an independent verification process because the tool is not from an independent company that doesn't have a stake in the business. What happens if Critic GPT gets too good and it finds out that maybe ChatGPT isn't a very good coder? What will OpenAI do then? Will it do the right thing for, moral and ethical and legal reasons, or will it focus on profit and push ahead anyway? So I always worry when there's no independence in that verification process. And unfortunately, OpenAI, good start. But I think this isn't something that I'm willing to hand my future over to, and I don't think anyone else should either.
Okay, we're here with Carmi Levy. When we come back, we'll talk about blowing up the International Space Station. It is technology time. No, it's time for technology time with expert in the industry, Carmi Levy. We're talking the stories of the day, and I thought we'd zoom all the way out to space, that area around us with not much in it. The International Space Station, the ISS, eventually it will need to be decommissioned and taken out of service. When that happens, something needs to be done, because at that point, it's just a big hunk of space garbage, and the orbit's going to decay, so we want to have control over the orbit and sort of decommission it on our own terms. Someone needs to do that work. Okay?
Yeah.
Who's going to do the work?
I vote for Elon Musk because apparently the U.S. government has awarded the contract for what they call the U.S. deorbit vehicle to SpaceX, so that when the ISS reaches end of life, they'll create kind of like it's like a space tug. Basically, it's a rocket with some guidance systems on it, and it will allow them to control the deorbiting process, land it in a certain part of the Pacific Ocean where nobody lives, where no debris will actually make it to the surface, and avoid injury, avoid damage to property and all that. And as you know, a couple generations ago, this U.S. had another space station, Skylab, which was supposed to have stayed in orbit until the space shuttle was ready to go service it. Unfortunately, its orbit degraded before the shuttle was able to fly, and it suffered an uncontrolled reentry with pieces scattered all over Australia. And eventually, the US government had to pay off property owners in Australia who suffered damage, because not everything burns up in the atmosphere when it re-enters. Pieces of it will still survive, and the ISS is the biggest satellite in history. It weighs close to 1 million pounds, and so conceivably large chunks of this thing are going to survive re-entry. You need to have a way to control that, to use a rocket to essentially pinpoint a spot in space so that it'll land where you want it to. This is a big deal. It's not to be taken lightly. There's a big budget for it, $843 million just to develop the vehicle, not to launch it, not anything else, just to create the vehicle. It'll probably add up on from there, but this is a major project, and it has to be handled well, because we know that space junk is a major issue, and certainly the ISS, given its size and sort of overall scope, that could be a disaster if it's not handled properly.
I feel like I misled our listener, singular intended. That I said that they were going to blow it up. I mean, it will kind of break up as it re-enters, because of the compression of air in front of the thing generates heat. That's why those tiles on the space shuttles go red when they and why comets get those burning trails when they hit the Earth. So there will be like a blow-up component, but there'll be debris everywhere, and that's got to be ejected or land in the right place.
Yeah, and it will be. I remember when the Mir space station that Russia had launched deorbited, and there was some video of it moving through the atmosphere. And these things are spectacular. Anything that is re-entering and breaking up as it does, in other words, it doesn't have a heat shield, is not designed to land in one piece. It's designed to essentially burn up as it hits the atmosphere, and friction creates very high temperature plasma fields around it. It's an incredible thing to watch, and quite frankly, I think the ISS re-entering will probably be from a video perspective, this will be like the thing of which documentary movies are made. I hate to think of the end of the ISS, because I think it's a wonderful program, but it's going to be quite the blow up party when it comes back to Earth.
Yeah, and it was such a sign of Cold War collaboration between two hostile nations. Like, I don't know, there's a
Yeah.
lot of
Thanks for ruining everything for us, Vladimir Putin. That's yeah.
yeah.
Russia apparently is has said that by 2028 they will be leaving the program. That's their end date. And the U.S. has said they'll continue to operate on orbit until at least 2030, possibly afterward. It all depends on how well the hardware still holds up in space. We know that things are starting to degrade. It's basically aging out. It's like keeping an old car on the road, except instead of being on the road, you've been flying at 17,500 miles an hour in the vacuum of space for 20, what are we, 27 years now, so 26 years. So it's time. And the good news is once the ISS is gone, NASA, of course, is working with international partners on other commercial space stations that will launch privately, and then NASA and other entities will be able to rent space and time on them, much like they do with commercial flight now. Instead of them, NASA building the vehicle, someone else does, and then NASA just buys access to it, hopefully at a cheaper rate for taxpayers.
Hopefully, but the privatization of space, a conversation for another time, but I'm not sure it's a great thing. Okay, let's stay in space. Let's talk about satellites. They're running computers like any other, I don't know, computer system. The things that relay messages, your GPS, satellites, all kinds of stuff are going on in space. And those computers may run older systems, which could be vulnerable to attacks that we now know of that we didn't know of then. Hacking in space is a real thing. And if your satellite does something sensitive, like takes sensitive photographs of your nation or controls weapons or internet, they really are a target for adversarial parties. So cyber attacks really can happen and may well have happened in space. So the U.S. military stepping in and they're trying to, I don't know, rally support, or what are they trying to do to prevent this kind of attack in the future?
Well, the Department of Defense has set up a partnership. They call it Commercial Augmentation Space Reserve, or CASR, which is basically partner with public and private organizations who work in technology, space, networking, all the technologies that are related to space flight, and identify what are the things that we need to do to make satellites and space travel safer, more resilient to the kinds of cyber attacks that we're seeing, not only on Earth, but increasingly in flight in space. And we'd have to be incredibly naive to think that satellites in space and all the systems that control them, the ground control networks, the people who run them, that they would not be vulnerable to a cyber attack. Cyber criminals go after whatever's out there, the biggest game, the most profitable game. And how notorious would you be as a cyber criminal, as a hacker, if you managed to bag, say, a big US satellite, or the GPS network or Starlink? So we know increasingly that the targeting is happening, and the US wants to be prepared and realizes it can't do it on its own. It needs to have all of the key stakeholders sitting around the table asking all the hard questions and making sure that the right technologies are being developed so that satellites and their constituent systems are as resilient and toughened against this kind of attack as possible.
I'm thinking ransomware too. Like if a hacking group steals a company's business records and says, you got to pay me $10 trillion or I won't give the records back, the business just replaces the computers. It's not great. This is a big problem for them. This may cost them many, many millions of dollars. But at a certain point, you can just kind of replace computers. With satellites, not so easy. You can't just go to Best Buy and buy a new satellite and just, I don't know, lob it up there with your right arm. So ransomware is also, even if the satellite doesn't pose any risk to consumers, if it's a corporate satellite for corporate reasons, for a corporate project that doesn't really affect me, the ransomware possibility is huge for these hackers.
It absolutely is. If you think about how integrated satellites are into everyday activities that you and I do, I navigate to the grocery store, I'm using the GPS network. Those GPS assets are vulnerable to a ransomware attack. They are controlled by ground controllers, any one of whom might, receive a message, click on the wrong thing, and next thing you know, all of those satellites are compromised, and the systems that control them are compromised as well. And so it almost doesn't matter sort of who. It could be a commercial provider for navigation. It could be a military provider for, weapons targeting. It could be the weather satellite that gives you your updates. Who knows what it is, but every single system that we use today has some kind of reliance on satellites, and because it is an interconnected networked system, is just as vulnerable to that as say the petroleum delivery system on the grounds, or your phone company, your cell company. They're all vulnerable. And unfortunately, what we're seeing is, because the military and many of these military satellites have often operated behind a veil of secrecy, they may not have had access to the latest, the leading edge protective technologies and processes. There's that veil of secrecy. And so the government's trying to figure out, how do we keep our high technology secret from the bad guys, but at the same time, give our satellite designers, give our military satellite controllers the best possible protection, even if it comes from a commercial off-the-shelf solution or company. So where does it make sense to build your own? Where does it make sense to buy it off the shelf? Where does it make sense to partner with some other company? That's what this CASR team, this Commercial Augmentation Space Reserve team, will try to figure out, to make sure that as the threat environment in space continues to worsen, that we're ready for it.
Carmi, thank you for your time. Thanks for going over these stories with me.
Great being with you, David. Thanks for having me.
It's no longer time for technology time with tech expert Carmi Levy. Up next, adulting. What is it? Why is being an adult so difficult and so overwhelming sometimes? That is the topic we will discuss with foreign correspondent Tony Five.
Now.
And now. Aren't you? You're going to lead it.
Are we recording already? This is amazing.
Yeah, you said "and now." I repeated "and now," and then what are you gonna? You do the next one, and then I'll repeat it. That's how we'll.
Oh, and now this is Tony Five.
This is Tony Five,
live from London.
Live from London,
England.
England.
He has a massive penis.
He's got a small. Okay, fine. He's got a massive. He's got an average-sized penis.
He's got a penis, David.
He does?
He does indeed.
Lock up your wives. The man has a penis.
I think some people, they want to go behind the curtain. Do you know that inside the actor's studio where somebody famous comes in and they open the spotlight on what their lives are like? I think sometimes our listener wonders, what is this like? This professional, polished show, not realizing that when you text me to call, you're usually on the toilet.
Yeah.
And then we try and come up with an idea. When even ChatGPT fails us miserably, then we know we're on to a winner, right?
Exactly right. You were waiting to tape, and I'm like, well, hurry up, we got to tape this time exactly. And then you're like, where are you, dude? I'm like, oh, I'm on the toilet. That happens exactly. 3 times a week at least?
Correct. And then we have a 5-minute conversation about converting military time to standard 5-year-old time.
Yeah, getting you and getting my brain the correct time, because you always send military time, because you British people, you're bilingual. You can do the AM, PM, or you can do the military.
Yeah. I mean, we swing both ways all the time.
I can do military, but I immediately convert it in my head to AM, PM. I have to.
Right.
If you tell me 17 o'clock, I just can make no sense. So I subtract the 12, or my system is to subtract 2. So 17 goes to 15 and then get rid of the 1. But then that doesn't work for times that are above 20, because I subtract. It's like 23 o'clock. Okay, you take subtract.
12 is 11, 11 p.m. Yeah.
1 is 19. Okay, so you take away the 2 and then it's 7. I can't do
4
it.
times by pi.
I know you subtract 12, but it's just, it's too much. 12 is not a great number to be subtracting.
Says the Silicon Valley graduate on $5 billion a year. Brilliant. Well played. With
a degree a minor in math. I guess that's not that impressive. I remember when I graduated from undergrad, I'm like, I have a minor in math and a major in engineering. And now whenever I say that, people are like, great, I'm a postdoctoral student in neuroscience. I'm like, great,
Yeah, whatever. Yeah, can I have a Big Mac, please, still?
How much education did you do? Just post-second, like undergraduate, or?
No, so undergrad, and then postgrad, and then up to doctoral.
You have no, you don't.
Yeah, up to doctoral. I didn't submit, but I've done all the work essentially for a doctoral in laser physics.
Why don't you finish and then you'd be Dr. Tony 5?
Just can't be bothered. I was sponsored by the MOD, so it's more in their favour for me just to carry on as a student because they get a load of tax breaks, and it worked out for me because I was in a lower tax bracket as a student. So I was like a student till I was like early 30s.
Exactly. So here I am saying I have an undergraduate in math. As an adult, I'm like, oh, that's not that impressive. But when I was like 20, You know, I could be like, I got an undergrad in math. You need some adding? I'm your guy. But I can't even subtract 12, all right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, at least you're good. Oh, no, not good looking.
Yeah.
At least you're good at...
No.
You're not good at radio either.
No.
At least you've got a girlfriend.
I mean, for now.
yeah, for today. So tell me, what's happening in your life? You sound all stressed. Talk to Tony, David. This is going to be a new segment. Talk to Tony.
What? Money stuff, you know, just money stuff.
Yeah. Do you counting it or just in general?
Just
or are you worried about
like
printing?
taxes and doing just, you know, and then
do you ever hate being an adult?
Rent.
Do you ever hate being an adult?
You know, you really look forward to that freedom of no one telling you what to do.
Right.
And then once you have it, you realize the responsibility. The people who were telling you what to do shouldered the adult responsibilities. Do you know what I mean?
True.
Like my parents 100%. When I was a kid, I mean, they weren't, you know, they were whatever. They were my parents. They weren't emotionally available, but they never beat me up and I was never hungry. Yes. But, you know, they kept the IRS away. You know, they paid the mortgage. I don't even know. Bills. They paid the television bill. It's like, it's unending, these adult responsibilities.
It does sound like you've had a sort of epiphany. Is this now around the time you've been thinking about it, or have you never thought of it before, or has it come about? It seems like today is like a cusp day. Well, like you've just it's all come about at once.
I'm trying to buy a house, and it's just like, it's going. I mean, it's just a lot of documents, a lot of approval. You get all these parties involved, you know, it's like, how does anyone do it at all? Parties? Like,
yeah, I know. It's weird.
The bank's got to agree, but then the sellers got to agree, but they need pre-approved, and then but the pre-approval doesn't matter, and then the letter, and we got to the taxes. It's unending, Tony. How does anyone do anything?
I know, it's strange, isn't it? Adulting is such a weird thing. When you're young, you believe it's so easy, you could just fall into it. And then when you're an adult, you think, I can't do this. I'm a child. I don't understand. And you kind of fake it till you make it for such a long time, right?
And you pay all these professionals. Like, I have an accountant, and she like made a mistake in my taxes, and I almost lost a huge credit that I had been holding on to. I at the last minute, I'm like, I better just look at these. I didn't quite understand it. I'm like, oh, is there a mistake there? She fixed it, but it's like, okay, now I got to double check all the professionals too. It's just, it never ends, and it's all piling up. But Tony, I'll tell you what it's really about today.
Hit me.
I'm underslept. That's it. It all feels so overwhelming when you're underslept, and then when you're well rested, it's like, okay, it's a lot, but I can manage it.
I can deal with this. Yeah, I wish I was there to like rub your little curly hair.
Oh, I thought you were going to say rub my little... Never mind.
No, I wouldn't do that, David.
That's adulting. I don't know how anyone manages it. Like, I don't have kids, but you got to enroll them in the school. You got to feed them. You got to clothe them. Then their clothes, they grow out of their clothes. You got to buy new clothes, you know?
Technically, you don't have to do any of that. You kind of want to. If you don't have to. Somebody will get involved if you don't, but I'm guessing you don't have to do that. But yeah, I agree. I just find sometimes it does get over when you stand back or sit back and think, God, what are we doing? It is crazy, right? It is like adulting is crazy.
It's wild. And then like, okay, growing up in Ontario in Canada, it was relatively straightforward to get a driver's license. You just go to the government building, you don't wait too long, whatever.
You still have to take lessons, right? Lessons and...
But you got to take lessons and take a test and then another test, whatever. But it's all like, I don't know. I thought it was annoying. But then I experienced the DMV in both California and New York, and it is a day-long event going there and asking for anything. Yeah, they screwed up my license 3 times. They got the spelling wrong. They got this wrong, that wrong. They had to reset the whole application and do it all again.
Your name is David Cooper. How could they do the spelling?
I was David Toma Cooper at first instead of Thomas.
Fantastic. I might like that. That's nice. Toma.
That was way back when I was still married. And so my ex-wife after that started calling me Toma, which I did not care for. But yeah, it's just being an adult is so much.
So like, do you not think that it would be great if there was sort of lessons in adulting? You know, like an online course and having to do deals.
Introduction to being an adult 101.
Yeah, like an introduction to being an adult.
High level. Here's how taxes work. Here's how
going all the way down to like buying toilet paper.
Here's how getting a loan works. Here's how you apply for a job.
Yeah, I just think it would be such a great idea if they could do a course with all the things that you're afraid to ask.
Yeah.
You know? All the things that you need to know but are afraid to ask.
Like basic financial literacy,
Yeah.
I always hear that athletes, especially in the United States, where
Yeah, I know what you're going to say.
even the ones with university education, they end up like, I don't know how they do it. They just like sweep the fact that they just don't do any courses or do basket weaving under the carpet, and then they become stars of the football team. Their education doesn't really matter. Somehow they graduate or don't, and then they become multimillionaires, tens of millions of heirs, millions of heirs in the NFL, the NBA, the MLB, and there's one more. The NHL, the hockey, not the NHS, which we talked about yesterday. Anyway, they become, and then their career's short-lived, right? You can only be an athlete from your early 20s to your mid-30s?
Yep, there's a window of opportunity, right? There's a window that they can earn, and then that's it.
Exactly. Or like in some rare cases, athletes can go into their 40s, but there's no 60-year-old athletes. They make all this money, and their whole focus has been sports. And they come out the other end, and then it's all gone, or they mismanage or invest it in stupid stuff. And so there's been an effort to like train athletes on basic literacy, and I think it's working. I think like a lot of them, are more conservative about their spending. They save, and I think something more general like that for people would be a good call.
You know what? I agree. So these guys, some of them have been elite athletes training from before they were teenagers, right? Mm-hmm. And then they go through their college, they go through whatever to train, and now they're top flight athletes. They've earned their money, they've done it honestly, and now they're right sort of maybe before they're 30, possibly. But a lot of these guys, they don't know anything about how to buy a house, about even writing checks. They don't know how to shop because they've never had to go shopping.
And why would they? They've devoted their whole life to the sport.
So they don't know. You can see, like, for example, they've opened their fridge and there's been food in the fridge. They've never had the concept of going to a supermarket. They've heard of it and they've probably driven past supermarkets, but they've never. And I remember seeing, even ridiculously, in this campaign, Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister of England, went to a petrol station and didn't know how to put a card in a machine and pay for petrol. Wow. He didn't know how to use a pin. It was phenomenal.
And he didn't know better than to have a camera crew watching. You know what I mean?
Correct.
Let's talk more about this in a second. Basic literacy of life, I think, is the topic here.
Oh, what a great name.
Basic literacy of life. That's the name of the course. Literacy of Life 101.
B-lol.
We're here with Tony 5. We are back with foreign correspondent Tony 5. We're talking about courses you can take to get the basic things you need to become an adult, because at times it can all be so overwhelming and no one teaches you this. Or maybe they do. My parents, my teachers, no one taught me like how to file a tax return, how to talk to an accountant, how to do any of it. And I just feel so badly prepared. I'm almost 40 and I don't feel like an adult today.
It's so strange. Like I said, I think the B-lol is good. The basic literacy of life qualification from Cooper University, subscribed to by Tony V. I think this would be it, David.
You were talking about the UK elections, about Rishi Sunak.
Rishi Sunak, yeah.
And I'm reminded of that show Arrested Development, where the mom, Jessica Walters?
Yep.
She's dead now, but she's so funny. Playing the mom, I think this is from that show, where she like asks her son to get some milk. And she's like, how much is a carton of milk? And then she hands him $100 bill. And it's like a joke. It's a commentary on rich people don't understand how groceries work or how basic things work. But you were saying how the current prime minister, who's very much about to lose an election, did not even know how to put a credit card in a gas pump?
He didn't know how to, basically didn't looking at him fill petrol in a car was the most awkward thing in the world to do. He did get the nozzle in the petrol tank, or the gas tank as you would call it, but paying for it with a PIN card, so putting your card in and a chip and PIN, he stumbled across it a few times, didn't know what was going on. He used a hammer once on the side. So a hammer has two ends and obviously two sides. Instead of hitting it with either end, he hit it with the side. Again, the most awkward thing in the world, just because he hadn't been taught it. He's gone to the best public schools in England.
He's been driven everywhere his whole life, basically.
Driven everywhere. He worked for, I think, the huge financial institutions in New York and so on and so forth. Unbelievable amounts of money, but probably hasn't done the smaller things. And sometimes I think, okay, would I rather be like him and have no awareness of anything that I would say normal in inverted commas people do, or would I like to be just like I am and know these things but not experience maybe the lifestyle he had? It's a fence I jump both sides on sometimes. I think there's a grass is greener syndrome. You think, oh my God, he must have an easy life. But then you think, well, is he really experiencing life as the masses do? So I don't know.
I feel like there's a lot of stories about, like the Titanic. You get kind of like the wealthy, sheltered, like Rishi. Kate Winslet in the movie, but
yep.
Or the documentary rather.
Yep.
And it's like this odd narrative in movies and stories of like this rich, out of touch, sheltered, maybe even like deluded or hateful or classist person who sees the poor as beneath them. Some crisis happens, they go on a journey. It's sort of like a Catholic narrative of like righteousness and poverty. They sort of experience the poverty. She experiences Leonardo DiCaprio. She learns from him. She sort of gets what she needs from the vulgar underclass. And then at the end of the movie, she doesn't need him anymore, so he just goes off and dies. Yeah.
Yeah, basically they kill him.
Even that is like a kind of a perverse narrative, right? Like the rich have something to learn from us, like the people who've never driven a car before because they've been driven their whole life. They have something to learn from us. But then once they do, they can just go back to being.
Well, they can drive on their own and they don't need us.
Yeah, they can now. They can drive their own Rolls Royce over us.
Exactly, Uber. Yeah, exactly. It's not like they're going to go to Uber. It would be different if the narrative was the rich person becomes an Uber driver, but it doesn't. Generally speaking, they put the Uber driver out of business and drive their own self brilliantly. So
this idea of what you're talking about, like, I've lived to the fullest because I've really experienced everything life has to offer. Sure, I don't fly around in private jets, but like I really know the people, the life. Like that's a more authentic way of being, whereas his rich, sheltered way of life is like not a great life after all when you see he can't even pump gas. That narrative is kind of like, it's really dividing the rich and the not rich. You know what I mean? It's really dividing the prime minister class and the people. And I think that division is the problem. Not that you get to choose one or the other, and maybe I'm actually happier because I lived a more rich and authentic life. I understand how people actually operate. I can connect with people versus, okay, I'm this rich person who can't. Like that whole narrative of those people existing and then going to the bowels of the Titanic, learning what they can from them, and then going back to the upper class and then just letting the poor people die. I don't know. I think the whole narrative's off, man. I really do.
I tell you what, 4 weeks ago, which is, again, you'll think it's a joke, but you can Google it and see, there was a politicians debate. So the leaders of the party came on and somebody asked the question, Rishi Sunak, you say you're a man of the people, blah, blah, blah. What did you have to go without with as a child? So a lot of people, like you said,
beluga
food,
caviar.
Clothing.
It's not that we couldn't afford it, but the supplier didn't have it for a week. What did he say?
Do you know what he said? He said, with no joke or malice and straight to the camera, that he went without Sky TV. Now, Sky TV is basically cable pay-per-view. That's what he said to an audience of regular people in London. Wow. It was on all the news. Yeah. And
it's a country we disagreed last episode about social assistance, welfare.
Yes, welfare.
That aside, whether you agree with that program or not, or think that program should be well-funded or not, the program itself is in shambles. I think we're going to both agree with that.
I think the distribution is in shambles. I think the program itself is fantastic, but it's open to abuse, and it is abused.
No. I don't mean the people who are using it. I just mean the administration of the program and the budget cuts within the program have left it dysfunctional. Whether you agree with the program or not, it's now dysfunctional as a result of his government.
Yes.
Same with the NHS.
I agree with the NHS, but the way it's used, been run, and is funded at the moment is horrific. Yeah, I agree.
So he's talking to these people that are like struggling, and government programs that have been slashed, and like these are what the people are grappling with.
By him and his government.
Yeah, and he didn't get pay-per-view TV, like HBO basically.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. HBO. I didn't know what your monthly subscription TV service is, but basically that's what he said with a straight face. I thought that was, I genuinely thought that was incredible. How can you say that? It was phenomenal. What a phenomenal thing to say.
I know you wanted to use the traditional British insult as "what a
Do you know what? That's absolutely made me very happy today, David. And I hope, have you noticed that as I laughed quite loudly, I moved back from the microphone, to come straight in and kill it. Did you notice that? We
were talking about microphone technique. It might be interesting to nobody, but considering who's listening to this, nobody. I'm kidding, listener. We appreciate you. Who are some of our
listeners?
Please
pay us.
There's Bobby in Kentucky. There's Danny in Alaska. There's
John, Illinois.
John in Mongolia as well, the two Johns, you know.
That's cool. Oh, big shout out to Mel, one of our long-term listeners, never called. She's just come out of hospital, so David and I are sending a lot of love and medication maybe to her. Hope she's feeling better soon.
So, where were we? Okay, this vulgar, this perverse narrative that the rich have something to learn from us. And the more authentic life is those who ride the subway, who know how to pump gas. And
again, the subway train ride always is reminiscent of your brother on a subway, just looking at these poor people, not wanting to touch anybody, but you still authentically trying to be part of it.
Isn't the Paper Bag Princess? Do you remember that story, the children's story?
No, Paper Bag Princess.
There's a children's book. I always read it. Maybe it's a Canadian thing or maybe it's an American thing, but it's by that author, Robert Munsch. Do you know of that author in the UK?
No, Robert Munsch, no.
Oh, he's a well-known children's author. He wrote wonderful children's books. He was a Canadian American guy. Dual citizen, actually. Anyway, long story short, the princess is all set to marry the prince, and then a dragon comes and kind of destroys the castle, kidnaps the prince, and burns off the princess's clothes. So she's in. So she has to put on a paper bag.
Oh.
Anyway, because that's all that's left after the dragon. So she goes on a quest. The dragon falls asleep. She rescues her prince, and all he can think of is, "Oh, you look awful. You're wearing a paper bag. I'm not sure I want to marry you."
What an absolute.
Yeah, right. And so in the end, she learned what she needed to learn from not being highborn, from living the paper bag lifestyle, and she dances off to the sunset, probably still being a princess, still being
marrying
rich.
the dragon.
Yeah, no, but I just mean this is like a baked-in. Do you see what I'm saying? This baked-in narrative of like this kind of like this righteousness in poverty that we know more, you know. As people who don't fly private jets.
More, like you said, authentic. We're living a real, true life existence. And the people that are not. But to them, it is a real life existence. We're the ones that are living the odd existence, right?
I just mean like, okay, I ride the subway and I talk to some stranger. And that interaction is more authentic than Rishi Sunak talking to his limo driver. You know what I'm saying?
Correct. Yeah, I agree. Yeah,
the whole narrative is perverse. Like, I hate it. And I just wish the two classes intermingled a little more. That's all.
I don't know. I mean, sometimes I think of class being very Western European English, but because in America, I don't see class, I see wealth differently, not class. And is that something that you can expand on? Because I don't, when I come to America, I see people who have got a lot of money. Yes, I agree, but not essentially different classes, if that makes sense.
We'll come back with that. It's interesting. Classes express themselves differently in different cultures.
Okay.
We'll talk more about that with Tony 5 in just a moment. We are talking about class, and Tony is puzzled, Tony 5, our foreign correspondent, that American class to him versus British class appears to be so money-based. And how would you describe it in the UK?
Okay, so English class is very, very, very distinctly different from English wealth and English moneyed people. So you can have somebody who's got a huge bank balance and will show it off. For example, you can buy into that. You can win the lottery. You can have a great YouTube channel. You can work really hard, and you can get to that stage where you have this money. It's very, very, I'm not going to say it's impossible, but it's very difficult to buy into the class system, the wealth system, as in the storied wealth, the country homes, they call them country piles, the going to attendees like these huge polo matches and these events that are only for aristocracy. So we're not even talking royalty here, which is a different level above, but we're talking aristocracy. So, lords, ladies, dukes, duchesses, not necessarily within the royal family, as it were, but maybe 4 or 5 times removed. When I came to New York or any of the big larger cities, I see a lot of wealth. So I see a lot of guys and girls who have got amazing cars, amazing properties. And then obviously I see the poverty as well, both sides of it, like we have here in the UK and in Europe. But it's very difficult to see the class. I've never seen the class aspect. If you told me, or you really pushed me to ask somebody who was classy in New York, or, rolled off the top of my tongue, or even where they would live or what they would do, I wouldn't even know that. I wouldn't even know. I know that there are obviously some huge places with lots of land that people who have got money, but I can only talk about the older people, like the Jacob Astors of before, or the Westinghouses, those huge families that kind of became monopolies in their the industrialists. Again, they didn't even come from money. They came essentially from working class who built up these huge amounts of money, and then their forebears have carried on. But what's your take on it?
Yeah, I think you're confusing the concept of class with the British version of it. I think you're just, in your mind, those two are the same thing. And therefore, when it doesn't express itself like the way you see it in England, where it's like, okay, you're more like, aristocracy. You have a title. The amount of dollars you have isn't quite as important. If you become a billionaire in the UK, the best way to become upper class is find someone who's a lord who's struggling financially, marry them, and then you get the title, but then you also have the money. It's like the perfect combo.
Correct.
That's not how it works in the U.S. I mean, there is some notion of hereditary. Okay, you're from a prominent family. Maybe you're a Kennedy. Maybe you're from the J.P. Morgan family.
Yes.
But it is so based on how much cash you have.
Right, okay. But in the southern states, where they've been slave owners and so on and so forth, and they're landowners, I can understand that more than I do in sort of places like New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, where I've never seen it there, if that makes sense.
You have seen it, you just didn't recognize it for what it was. You're talking about these people with the nice homes, the nice cars. In the U.S., those are the upper class. It's
those, that's what you class as upper class in the US.
It's I mean, there is some hereditary stuff going on. You're from a good name. Just like in the UK, there's some purely cash stuff going on. You said it's difficult to buy your way in, but not impossible. In the US, it's more difficult to have this hereditary, I come from an impoverished family, but I'm still a Kennedy.
Yes.
It's possible. But in the US, if you make $1 billion, if you win the lottery, boom, you're up a strata. You've climbed up a rung. You've bought your... That's just how it works in the U.S. And it's really a function of the country's history and what they rebelled against in forming.
Yeah. So you're.
I mean, look at India, Tony. I mean, I don't want to the caste system. That's how class expressed itself. It doesn't look like American classes. It doesn't look like
completely
UK.
different.
I know the caste system has its awful sides and it's been mostly abolished and all that, but I just mean different.
It's still around, still alive and working. You can. There are still people that won't marry into different classes.
There's subtle discrimination, but technically it's codified in Indian law. My understanding that it's been abolished. Am I right on that? Do you know?
No, I still think there are still people called the Brahmins and the Tamils and whatever it is who are different caste systems. I don't know how you would abolish it's a thought rather than it's a process. I don't know how you would abolish that in law, but maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
Yeah, I think just you can't discriminate for hiring. You can't, you know what I mean? In all the ways where, I think.
No, I didn't know. I don't know where you heard that, but maybe it's true. But it's like you were telling me about the whole co-op thing. Although you can't discriminate based on where you're from because it was brought out purely based on discrimination. The whole concept of it they still do.
Yes.
You've got no way of proving it. So I guess it's the same way.
I'm looking it up. Negative discrimination on the basis of caste was banned by law, and it's enshrined in the Indian Constitution as of 1950. So, like, you can't, if you're looking for a job, just like in the U.S., you can't say, hey, you're of this ethnicity, you're of this gender, you can't have it. In India, it's the same way. But, your family could pressure you not. It could still sort of exist in subtle ways.
Correct. Yeah.
But I'm just saying that's how class worked in that country up until technically the 1950s.
Okay, so
in other countries it might be like a religious thing. If you're of like a religious order, Saudi Arabia, Islam is enshrined as the state a religion. So like all the officials are from the royal family. So their class system's totally different then.
Completely.
So you're confusing the British way of doing it with that's how it's defined. And I'm saying there's different ways, and in the US it's cash based.
So here, if let's just say two people, one in the States, one in the UK, right? They both win X amount of money, and you said that person in the US will go to upper class. Is that what you said?
In most cases,
Okay.
they may actually, they might move to a neighborhood and get rejected by I don't know, but I mean that it's not like they need to have a title. Money is the best way to get in.
In the UK, you can still be poor, be upper class.
I know.
And it's and so one of the silly observations that I can make just now by saying that to you is the way they talk. So with all the money you could earn and work for or win, yes, you might be able to have the castle and you might even be able to buy the title. You will not talk like them because it will sound so basically dislodged from the person that you are. It would be like me saying, David, hello, yes, yeah. It sounds so awkward for me to do it that's what I mean by relating to class. Like, you could spot or hear these people a mile off. You may not necessarily have any outward signs, like the money, seeing their checkbook, seeing their bank balance, seeing what car they drive or what shoes they're wearing. But you would hear them. You could hear them in a locked room in the dark.
Yeah, you guys hear accents way more. You discriminate. You see when you hear a voice, you think of who that person is, where they're from. In the U.S., it's kind of like that. I mean, if someone has a deep Southern accent.
Southern, yeah, I was going to say that.
But like, what's my accent?
Yours is. Well, I mean, I know you now, so it's a very radio like. Yours, what I would class as like an average American or average Canadian.
Exactly.
Like,
but you could sound like me and be a prime minister. You could sound like me and be homeless. I'm saying that it's like you're saying. Here's another thing that's baked in where people know. This hereditary, where you're born, who you're born from, what are your circumstances around growing up. It's all in your accent. That doesn't quite exist quite the same way in the U.S. at all.
No,
really.
I know. No, I don't think it does. You're right. But here, you would be, before you even walked into the room on a telephone, you would be judged.
I know.
Which I don't think that would happen in the States.
Awful. I think that's one of the main things about the UK that I fucking hate. Like, I think that's such an ugly way that's something you can't control where you're from. And yet it's used as a basis as a class marker and as a discrimination.
It's weaponized. You can be like, and it's happened to me, to be fair. Dude, I've gone for jobs and positions.
When I watched that show Naked Attraction on Channel 4 in the UK, where they're dating naked, it's like, how more hippy dippy, bohemian, weird. And then this naked woman's like, oh, I don't like a Northern accent. And I'm like, you understand what you're saying is you don't like people you think are poor. Like,
correct.
Do you know what I mean?
But you'll say that. I don't like that.
They're like, I can't stand a Scouse accent, which is like a kind of a lower class Manchester accent.
Yeah.
But isn't that what that is? If you're Scouse, you're stereotypically like of the lower working class.
Correct.
In Manchester.
Areas, exactly.
So
Manchester.
These people just overtly are like, I don't like a Scouse accent. And I'm like, all you're saying is I don't like poor people from Manchester.
Correct.
And I'm like, it's so insane to me. If you went on at a dating show and you said, I don't like poor people from Manchester, people would be like, that person's insane. But they get away with it because it's accent.
You're so right, and it's such a brilliant observation. You could 100%. So you're looking there naked, and they're looking at these naked bodies, and when that person talks, whatever, they all judge that person, even though their cock and balls are hanging out, on what they speak like. Amazing, absolutely incredible.
That's why I hate the UK system. I mean, the American system's not without problems. Don't get me wrong.
I mean, you shoot people.
It's a messed up, horrible country. And with the Supreme Court ruling today or yesterday night or whatever, I'm just like, great. Is Trump going to assassinate his political rivals if he wins?
I think he should.
I think this country is messed up, but I think that ideological founding principles of it are much better than a system where you're born into class and stuck there your whole life.
Ideological? Wasn't he a dictator of some sort of African place?
He might have been. You're thinking of Idi Amin.
Oh, right.
Tony, this is a good conversation today.
See, David, sometimes out of nothing, out of a bunch of turds, a little sunflower rises.
I think of what Tony Tedesco, a guy I used to work with and you used to work with, said to me one night when I was stressed when a guest didn't show up and I had to go live on a radio show. And he said, open your mouth, something will come out. And I think he was just angry at me, like, shut up, David. But I took it to mean something really deep, which is like...
He was a very angry guy.
Well, he was, still is. I took it to mean like, okay, you're prepared for this. You've been on the radio before. Open your mouth. You'll be able to do your job. And I take it in a deep way. And so, Tony, we opened our mouths and something came out.
That's good. In fact, I've got a little bit of gastric bile. So that's probably what it was as well.
This has been Gastric Bile with Tony 5. Based on a recent survey, it turns out that we think our coworkers are more miserable than they are. They're kind of happy, or at least happier than we think. We'll get to the person who's responsible for this survey, who did a study on this, and unpack this and what it means for the workforce. We are here to discuss the misery myth. The question, are your coworkers happier than you think they are? We are here with Scott Schieman, professor of sociology and Canada Research Chair at the University of Toronto, to discuss an article that he recently wrote on this topic. Scott, thank you for joining me, and thank you for letting me unload my personal problems on you before we started this taping.
Not a problem. I'm happy to be here.
Good. For the second one, the taping.
Yeah.
Real professional. Aren't you glad you did this? Okay. Job satisfaction. This is something that you look into in your writings, in your research. Why the curiosity on this? Why is it something that you've been wanting to look into?
Yeah, it's funny. We have a crazy relationship with job satisfaction. I mean, so some people love the concept. Some people hate it. We love to talk about whether we're satisfied with something or not. And, it's such a loaded subjective concept, but I've been studying work for couple decades now, and just really have been fascinated with what people say about their own jobs, but then got really curious about this kind of generalized other worker that people maybe have in their minds, and what their conditions and quality of work life look like in people's heads. And so, again, that curiosity came out of something I think we talked about before, which was sort of the Great Resignation and all of the labor market chaos and turmoil that came up in 2021 and 2022. And I just saw the narrative constantly with headlines like, why is everyone so unhappy at work right now? And just got really, really curious to try to unpack it. And so that sort of set in motion a bunch of studies to try to really dig deeper into this question about what the heck is going on with job satisfaction.
So I guess the wider conversation here is, what do we think our coworkers are experiencing when we think of their happiness? Would the average worker say that their coworker is a happy person in their job, or that they're just as miserable as we are? There's this sort of notion that we build up of others in our head, and it often has no mapping to reality.
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line, the piece that we wrote with my colleague Paul Glavin, co-author Paul Glavin and I, called The Misery Myth in the Toronto Star, it basically tries to capture this idea that most people feel relatively personally satisfied, somewhat or very satisfied with their job. So usually it's about 80% or so are quite, somewhat or very satisfied with their own job, but a substantially larger percentage of people think that their own coworkers are not as satisfied. And so that's pretty consistent with a general gap that we find with people also thinking that most other Canadian workers, again, on average, are just less satisfied. So nuts and bolts, if I was asking you a question on a survey, like how satisfied would you say all in all you are with your job? And you said very satisfied or somewhat satisfied. And then I did a follow-up and asked, well, what would you say, like, if the most Canadian or American workers would say to that same question? And the answer that we get is just a big, big gap in terms of more people think most people are not at all or not too satisfied with their job. That happens at the general level, but we found that it also filters down even to the more local context of your own coworkers. So what's going on there? I mean, we don't have an answer for that yet, except that we just think people extract out more of the negatives that they see in everyday life, or the conversations tend to be more negative. But then you might ask, well, why doesn't that circle back to people's own evaluations? And I don't know, who the heck knows? It just seems like we like that negativity instinct or something.
It seems like you've tapped on another perception glitch, as you called it last time, where we think one thing of ourselves and then we think a totally different thing of others, but that's not quite how things are going with others. How does this express itself in the workplace? Which is to say, me thinking my coworkers are more miserable than they are reporting. What would happen in a workplace with these kind of perceptions of others?
Well, one of the things that we found, which is probably pretty troubling if you're an employer, is even if you yourself are very satisfied with your job, if you kind of have a whiff of this negativity or you think it's out there, we actually found that it undermines or erodes your own commitment to the organization or the firm, and also increases your own potential for thinking about changing jobs. So, and again, that's if your own position, you feel pretty good about it. So again, the mechanisms are hard to disentangle here because there's a lot of psychological and social psychological stuff going on. But we found that really compelling and potentially problematic. Again, if you're an employer, like, well, wait, you're very satisfied with your job, but if you think more coworkers are dissatisfied than is really the case, then it can really kind of circle back, almost like a feedback loop. And it could touch back into maybe that it just makes relations with employers a little bit more adversarial than they need to be. You know what I mean? Like, if you just feel like there's a negative vibe in the workplace, it kind of taps into something maybe more about that whole bad employer situation. And so that's one angle that we're looking at now, just the effects that it has on, people's sense of loyalty and commitment to the organization.
So correct me if I'm wrong. Here's my understanding. I'm fairly satisfied in my job, hypothetically. I think my coworkers are dissatisfied and they're not. Therefore, I'm more likely to job hop or seek a new job based on this glitch or this perception gap between what's actually going on with others and what I think is going on. That makes me more likely to job hop.
That's what we're kind of seeing in the data. And again, we're cautious about making any kind of causal claims because we can't really do experiments. I mean, there probably is a cool way you could do a creative experiment here, but we can't, randomly assign you to one condition and have you have.
You can't create a fake employer and then study the people who think they're working.
I'd like to, but I guess what it boils down to is like, yeah, even if that's a thing that's surprising. Even if you yourself it's worse if you're not satisfied, but even if you yourself are very satisfied, if you feel or you perceive that there's just a greater share of your coworkers who are not as satisfied as you, then it does kind of create this, I guess you'd call it bad vibes that is in some way, shape, or form having an effect on, and I'll use effect in quotes here, an effect on your own commitment to the organization. And you can, I guess it makes sense in some ways because it's like, well, something's going on in the organization that just doesn't make you feel quite as good about what's happening with your coworkers. And so we kind of lay all that out in the Toronto Star piece, and you can see some of the specific numbers, but that is something that we want to explore and maybe try to follow people over time. So that way, you get more of a longitudinal snapshot where you can say like, you said this about your workplace. Did you actually follow up and leave? The other thing that we'd like to do is actually follow up directly with people that do in-person interviews or Zoom interviews to really try to figure out what they think's going on and why they think more people are dissatisfied.
Interesting. Now, you mentioned the article, of course, where people can look to get some of these numbers. One thing you mentioned is this concept of quiet quitting, quiet firing, quiet vacationing. It's sort of a culture of silence that's going on in workplaces. Can you say more about this?
Yeah, I don't know where these concepts came from or how they even take off in terms of, I think maybe TikTok, quiet quitting came out of TikTok or something. But yeah, we've sort of been, Paul and I have been chuckling to ourselves every time a new concept or term comes out that adds quiet, And in fact, they're not quiet quitting. I mean, quiet quitting's, they're still working. They're just not going above and beyond on the job. So basically they're working, but somebody decided to call that quiet quitting. And yeah, I think the notion that it's quiet is it's like, instead of like you're overtly doing things that maybe are negative or bad or not, purposely not doing your job, it's actually just more to quietly stepping back, passively kind of not going above and beyond. And I think that's the thing that we write about in the piece, is it's sort of, again, it implies that there's this just broader cultural vibe that's happening in the workplace, and people are doing these things and there's a sense of it out there. I mean, just in a snapshot, I'll tell you, Gallup, for example, came out with, 50% of American workers are quiet quitting. And then they came out with 75% of Canadian workers are quiet quitting. We've debunked both of these claims. But then Paul sent me a text the other day, Paul Glavin, and said like, oh, in the UK, the Gallup suggests that in the UK, 90% of workers are quiet quitting. And I joked back and I said, why don't we just call it 100? What
about 110? Isn't that how percentages work?
It's kind of ridiculous if you think about that. And I mean, again, probably for another conversation, but we've dug deep into this idea, and people personally just don't report anything close to that. So I'm not really sure where they're coming up with those numbers, but you can imagine that if you're not informed and you hear those little data points or big data points, and it's coming from a reputable source, you're like, wow, something really must be wrong with work. Something's really wrong. And headlines like work is broken and work is toxic, and a steady diet of those things, I think at some point probably circles back to affect you, right?
Got it. Well, thanks for covering this article. It sounds like the best I can do is, if I'm happy in my job and I'm thinking of quitting, because I think my coworkers aren't, maybe talk to them. I think, is that the takeaway?
That is one of the takeaways. I think we need to be more open about what's going on. And also, I think, talk a little bit more about some of the positives. There's a lot of good stuff that people personally tell us in the survey. So it's not like it's not out there. In fact, most of it's positive, but you would never know that if you just go with the negativity vibes.
Positive doesn't sell headlines. I think that was our conclusion from our last talk, and it sucks that that's our conclusion today as well. Scott, thank you for talking to me. I appreciate you going over this article with me.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Scott Schieman, professor of sociology and Canada Research Chair at the University of Toronto. A recent study connects teens and adolescents who use cannabis with being 11 times more likely to develop a psychotic disorder. We will talk to the author of that study and figure out what it all means for kids who dabble in those sweet, sweet marijuanas. Well, there is an alarming connection between adolescent cannabis use and increased risk of developing psychotic disorders. That's at least according to new research. I'm here with someone who worked on that. They are an epidemiologist and postdoctoral fellow at McMaster University. Their name is André McDonald. André, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, David.
So let's jump real high level here. What did this study that you did look into?
Yeah, so this study basically used survey data from about 11,000 youth in Ontario, Canada. And what we did is we linked survey data to health service use data. So, for example, if you went to the doctor for a visit, that would be coded possibly as a psychotic disorder. And what we looked at was the association between youth, so from age 12 to 24, we looked at the association between self-reported cannabis use and subsequent health service use for psychotic disorders.
Got it. And the motivation behind looking into this in the first place?
Well, in terms of cannabis, this is one of the biggest questions, and especially in the Canadian context. It's been just over 5 years since we legalized cannabis. So this is a very hot topic, and there's, a lot of other countries that are undergoing policy reform. You think of the US that's rescheduling, Germany recently legalized. And this is one of the big concerns related to cannabis. And so we wanted to conduct a high quality study A lot of the previous research has used older data, which is maybe not as relevant today, considering the increase in cannabis potency that has occurred over the last, especially 20 years.
So I feel like with legalization happening, we sort of know the physical health side effects are mostly safe, other than just, smoking's not great for you, whether it's cannabis or tobacco. But the sort of psychiatric, the psychology, the public health side of things, I feel like it's all kind of new territory. And the research is only now getting going in terms of the effect it has on youth with widespread use. Do you think we'll see more studies that answer questions like this going into the future?
Yeah, definitely. And I should clarify, for the vast majority of teens who use cannabis, it's not like the vast majority of teens using cannabis won't develop a psychotic disorder. A lot of the media exposure that this study has had is a bit alarmist. But so I just want to point out that, a lot, like most teens won't develop a psychotic disorder, but it is concerning that the association is very strong. And so I think because of that strong association, we will see more studies coming out.
So what I'm hearing is the chance of developing psychotic disorder is quite low. So even if you multiply it by 11 times, you're still not getting this insane rate that every child using cannabis or every adolescent using cannabis is getting a psychotic disorder. That would be the proper way to frame it.
Correct. So the base rate of psychotic disorders in teens is relatively low. It's not non-existent. But when you compare it to teens who are using cannabis to teens who aren't using cannabis, the relative risk is really high, and that is concerning from a public health perspective.
Do we know anything about the sort of neurochemical or anything about the why in terms of this happening, or is it just these are the findings? We don't exactly know the mechanism by which this increased rate is happening.
So I'm an epidemiologist. I'm not a neuroscientist, so that's not exactly my area of expertise. But, from my high-level reading of the literature, it has something to do with the endocannabinoid system. All I can say with some authority is that it's biologically plausible, but we don't, have a firm understanding of how the relationship works.
So let's look at it from an epidemiology perspective. Like, what is the risk here to our youth, and what are your recommendations that we do based on these findings?
Yeah, so that was the interesting part of this study. So we found that in teens, so specific to teens, teens using cannabis were 11 times more likely to develop a psychotic disorder compared to teens not using cannabis. But again, this was an age-dependent association. When we extended that to young adults, so from 20 years of age up to 33, we did not find a significant association. So there's something specific about those early years of neurodevelopment that we think might have something to do with this relationship.
But even in jurisdictions where cannabis is sold legally, I believe the age is usually 18, 19, 20. So it's already not supposed to get into the hands of kids, but I imagine it is anyway. What are your recommendations that we do, or what would you like to see done based on this data so that kids can't get access to it, or better education is available to kids so they don't abuse it or use much of it at all?
Yeah, I mean, that's basically a separate question from this study, but it's like a very important question, is the policy implications of this. I think we probably should be evaluating different age of, legal purchase. That would be something that we need to understand more fully, whether, we can set the age at different thresholds, but we're trying to basically minimize earlier cannabis use. So, in a lot of states, it's the same as alcohol, where it'd be 21. Based on these findings, that would be more consistent in terms of preventing youth. In Canada, we have some provinces where the legal age of purchase is 18. I don't want to say that that's wrong, but we need research to investigate, what age limit is from a public health perspective most effective.
Of course, I'm not a policymaker, but I wonder, there's varying degrees of severity of warnings on cigarette packages depending on where you buy them. I grew up in Ontario, Canada. The warnings are very graphic and severe. I live in New York now. They're less severe, but they're there. I wonder if something on a package of cannabis, sort of warning that kids getting access to this or adolescents getting access to this can cause these sorts of damages would be a good idea. What do you make of that?
I don't think it would hurt. And I think that there is enough research to support that kind of a harm reduction approach. Just because, from a precautionary perspective, we should be warning youth that there are risks associated with cannabis use at those early ages. So I don't think it could hurt.
So if anything, warnings could be good. What do you think parents and educators need to know based on the findings? Now that this info is out there, is there anything that you would want parents and teachers to know so they can at least tell kids?
Yeah. So like I was saying earlier, just because cannabis potency has increased so much, I think a lot of, parents who would give advice to their kids about cannabis might be giving that information based on their experiences and the types of cannabis products that were around when they were teens. And those products were fundamentally different than the products we have today. So, in Canada, in the 1980s, the average potency of flower cannabis was 3%. And today it's about 20%. So it's fundamentally a different product. So for parents and teachers, if I think raising awareness of that increase in potency would be important.
Anecdotally, I'm not a fan of pot. I mean, I'm glad it's legal and everything. I was in my backyard. My friends were smoking it in my parents' backyard. My dad came out. He started acting like a big shot, saying, in my day, I did this. In my day, I did that. He took a little bit and he just could not handle it. And the only thing he could say was, it's a lot different than when I was a kid. So that's my anecdotal experience. You're right. The level of THC just keeps on getting sort of selected for or bred into these strains. And it just keeps on going up and up and up, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And not even just herbal cannabis. So you've got different types of cannabis products. You've got cannabis extracts are the extreme. And in those products, it's basically pure THC. So you can get above 95% THC in those products. And so, the modes of use and the types of products that teens are using today are just very different than, from the 60s to the 90s, basically.
All right. Well, thank you for your time, André. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, David. André
McDonald is a study author on the findings that teens who use cannabis are 11 times more likely to develop a psychotic disorder. He is an epidemiologist and a postdoctoral fellow at McMaster University. That is our show. Thank you for listening. I'll be back Wednesday, July the 10th. Have a nice time doing whatever you want. I don't care.